The 2017 Atlantic hurricane season is one that lives in infamy. The season saw a total of 17 named storms, 10 hurricanes, and 6 major hurricanes, due in most part to 3 of those hurricanes, being Harvey, Irma, and Maria. The 2017 season stands far and away as the costliest hurricane season on record, totaling over $294 billion worth of damage and claiming 3,369 lives. The season is only one of 2 on record that saw 2 Category 5 hurricanes make landfall. The season started a little slow, but once it got going, it was an onslaught that just did not stop, as the season's 10 hurricanes occurred consecutively, with major hurricanes spinning away for a total of an astonishing 19 days. The satellite photo from September 8th shows 3 simultaneous hurricanes, with Jose on the right, the monster Irma in the middle, and Katia on the left. So without further ado, let's go back to the beginning and recap this historic season. The season got off to an early but weak start, with Tropical Storm Arlene forming on April 19th, over a month before hurricane season officially begins, but it remained weak and just made a circle out in the middle of the ocean. 2 months later, Tropical Storm Brett formed on June 19th and was another weak, short-lived storm, which actually did cause some localized moderate damage in the Windward Islands and along the coast of South America. Right on the heels of Brett was Tropical Storm Cindy, which formed in the Gulf and moved up towards the Gulf Coast. Cindy made landfall as a moderate 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm in Louisiana, causing minor storm surge and wind damage. After Cindy, there was a lull for a few weeks until Tropical Storm Don formed, which, as you can see here, did a whole lot of nothing. Next was Tropical Storm Emily, which formed off the west coast of Florida and immediately moved over the state. Emily was a sloppy storm but caused a large area of heavy rain, causing widespread flooding, but nothing that Florida couldn't handle. After Emily, the season would see its first of the 10 consecutive hurricanes. Franklin formed on August 7th in the Western Caribbean and quickly moved over the Yucatan Peninsula as a moderate tropical storm. Franklin then moved back over the Bay of Campeche, where it strengthened into a Category 1 hurricane before quickly making another landfall in mainland Mexico. Damage over the Yucatan was minimal, but Veracruz saw many downed trees, isolated power outages, and some homes damaged. Right after Franklin, Gert formed out in the Atlantic, where it remained a fish storm but would strengthen into a formidable Category 2 hurricane with a nice-looking eye. This is where the 2017 hurricane season flips the switch. The next storm would form from a tropical wave that tracked across the Atlantic Ocean and developed into a weak tropical storm named Harvey. Harvey tracked into hostile conditions in the Caribbean, which actually degenerated the storm back into an open wave. Its remnants continued traveling west and was able to reform back into the tropical storm once it reached better conditions in the Gulf. As you can see here, it actually was not forecast to even strengthen into a hurricane at all. But as it reached the Texas coast, Harvey underwent rapid intensification, quickly becoming a major Category 4 hurricane with winds of 130 miles per hour before making landfall near Rockport, Texas. This major hurricane landfall was the first in the United States since Wilma made landfall in Florida in 2005, ending the longest major hurricane strike drought in recorded history. Although the area where Harvey made landfall was sparsely populated, the major hurricane eyewall still inflicted extreme damage on the Rockport area. Many homes, apartment buildings, and businesses sustained major structural damage from the intense winds, and several were completely destroyed. But this would only be the beginning of what would turn into one of the worst catastrophes in American history. After Harvey made landfall, its winds significantly weakened like all hurricanes do, but the storm became trapped between 2 atmospheric ridges and the storm stalled. Harvey would more or less sit stationary over the greater Houston area for 4 days, resulting in historic and catastrophic rainfall. The National Hurricane Center declared Harvey the most significant tropical cyclone rainfall event in United States history. The highest rainfall accumulations totaled over 60 inches. This well surpassed the previous records for tropical cyclone rainfall for both the continental United States as well as for the entire United States. The weather station at George Bush Intercontinental Airport observed all-time record daily rainfall accumulations on both August 26th and 27th, measured at 8.37 and 16.07 inches respectively. Besides Houston, nearly the entirety of southeastern Texas received at least 3 feet of rain, and an estimated 25 to 30% of Harris County, about 440 square miles of land, was submerged. Throughout Texas, approximately 336,000 people were left without electricity, and tens of thousands required rescue. Throughout the state, 103 people died in storm-related incidents, 68 from its direct effects, including flooding, and 35 from indirect effects in the hurricane's aftermath. By August 29th, approximately 13,000 people had been rescued across the state, while an estimated 30,000 were displaced. Total economic loss from Harvey is estimated to be $125 billion, making it tied with Hurricane Katrina as the most costly storm to impact the United States. Unfortunately, Harvey will be only the first of the catastrophic hurricanes of 2017, as the next one had already started to develop before Harvey even dissipated. As Harvey was finally leaving the Houston area, another tropical wave was developing in the far eastern Atlantic Ocean. This wave would develop in the central Atlantic Ocean into Tropical Storm Irma. In the first advisory issued at 11 a.m. on August 30th, the National Hurricane Center set Irma as a 50-mile-per-hour tropical storm. Only 24 hours later, it had rapidly intensified into a 100-mile-per-hour Category 2 hurricane, and a few hours after that into the 115-mile-per-hour major Category 3 hurricane. Irma churned through the Atlantic heading due west, and not only did it continue to intensify, it also grew in size to an enormous buzzsaw. As it approached the Caribbean, it had strengthened into what was the strongest hurricane ever recorded in the open Atlantic, a monster Category 5 hurricane with 185-mile-per-hour winds. Irma made landfall on Barbuda, St. Martin, and the British Virgin Islands, all at its catastrophic peak intensity. Look at how the eye completely swallowed the entire island of Barbuda. The entire island had to endure the front and back eye walls, going through the 180-mile-per-hour sustained winds twice. Irma damaged or destroyed 95% of the structures on Barbuda. It completely flattened some residential blocks while submerging others. The destruction rendered the island's sole airport and much of its infrastructure inoperative, including water and telecommunication services, which made relief efforts extremely difficult. In St. Martin, entire structures were swept away, roads and cars were submerged, and the entire island lost power. As many as 95% of the buildings there were damaged to some degree, and 60% of those were totally uninhabitable. Damage was also similar across the Virgin Islands. Irma then continued at Category 4 or 5 strength just north of the Greater Antilles, brushing Puerto Rico and Hispaniola, then passing through the Turks and Caicos and Bahamas, and then made landfall on Cuba as a Category 5, only the second time a Category 5 has ever hit Cuba. Over 150,000 homes were damaged and almost 15,000 were completely destroyed, resulting in over $13 billion of damage in Cuba, making it the costliest storm in Cuban history. Irma's eye continued to track over Cuba, causing it to weaken down to a Category 2 storm before it made its long-awaiting turn to the north, back over water with sights on Florida. As Irma was approaching the Caribbean, all weather models were predicting that it would make a right-handed turn to the north, but the exact point it would turn was unknown, causing incredible panic throughout Florida. Would it turn early and strike Miami and the rest of the populated East Coast, or turn a little later and ride up the West Coast? The initial forecasts were largely thinking it would turn up the East Coast, which resulted in the largest evacuation in Florida's history. 6.5 million people left home, many from both sides of the state heading north, but also unfortunately many from the East Coast who fled over to the West Coast. I really like this graphic, which shows the center line of all official forecasts. You can see how it starts on the East Coast and then gradually moves west. After Irma moved off Cuba and back into the Florida Straits, it again strengthened back into a Category 4 hurricane, making landfall on the Florida Keys at that strength, and then its final landfall on mainland Florida at Marco Island as a slightly weaker Category 3 major hurricane. The massive hurricane then continued north up the spine of the Florida Peninsula, covering the entire state, bringing hurricane warnings from coast to coast. Irma's size and path caused damage throughout the entire Florida Peninsula. More than 7.7 million homes and businesses in Florida lost power at some point, which accounts for approximately 73% of the state, and power was lost in all 67 counties. At the peak of the power outages, 64% of the state was without power at the same time. Numerous homes and businesses throughout the state were damaged to some degree, including more than 65,000 structures in the west central and southwest Florida alone. Irma would be the costliest storm in Florida's history, far surpassing Hurricane Andrew, but would be surpassed itself 5 years later when Hurricane Ian struck in 2022. Hurricane Irma may go down in history as one of the most terrifying storms of all time. due to its enormous size, incredible strength, and its path it took barreling down on so many Caribbean islands and then Florida. Irma would end up resulting in $77 billion of damage and causing deaths of 134 people. Immediately on the heels of Irma was another storm that terrifyingly was looking to take almost the exact same path. In almost the same location in the eastern Atlantic and only a week behind Irma, Tropical Storm Jose had formed and just like Irma was intensifying. Amazingly, Jose would intensify all the way up to a 155 mile per hour Category 4 hurricane, just shy of Category 5, and was making its way towards the exact same islands that just saw total destruction from Irma. Luckily, this near Category 5 hurricane would not be one of the storms to cause destruction, as it curved away just in time and barely brushed the islands with its outer bands. It would go on to make a loop over the Atlantic and then dissipated off the New England coast. At the same time as Irma and Jose, another storm quickly spun up in the western Gulf, which was classified as Tropical Storm Katia. Katia meandered a bit off the coast of Mexico, where it strengthened into a Category 2 hurricane. Katia made landfall in Veracruz as a minimal hurricane where it quickly dissipated due to the mountainous terrain. Katia caused minimal damage in this sparsely populated area, mainly from flooding and mudslides. Also at the same time, another storm quickly formed right behind Jose back in the middle of the Atlantic. Lee would strengthen into an impressive Category 3 major hurricane, but remained a fish storm for its entire life. The next storm, however, would end up being the strongest and the most destructive storm of the season. Like so many other hurricanes this season, a tropical wave heading west across the Atlantic Ocean began developing and on September 16th was named Tropical Storm Maria. Maria gradually strengthened into a minimal hurricane on September 17th, but then underwent explosive intensification, nearly doubling its intensity from 85 miles per hour to a 165 mile per hour Category 5 hurricane in only 24 hours, and at which time it was only 15 miles away from the island of Dominica. Maria made landfall on Dominica as the only Category 5 ever to directly strike the small island. The extreme winds damaged the roof of practically every home on the island, including the official residence of the Prime Minister, who had to be rescued when his home began to flood. Downing all cellular, radio, and internet services, Maria effectively cut Dominica off from the outside world, and the situation there remained unclear for a couple of days after the hurricane's passage. Maria caused $1.3 billion of damage on the small island, equaling 226% of the island's GDP. The hurricane force bands also caused extreme damage on the island of Guadalupe as it continued in a northwest direction, with its next target being Puerto Rico. Maria strengthened after entering the Caribbean to its peak of 175 mile per hour winds with a central pressure of 908 millibars, the 11th lowest of any Atlantic hurricane. An eyewall replacement cycle caused the maximum winds to slightly decrease to just below Category 5 status, making it an extremely intense Category 4 hurricane with 155 mile per hour winds as it made landfall on Puerto Rico, the strongest hurricane to hit Puerto Rico in almost 90 years. Extensive damage occurred to hundreds of thousands of buildings throughout Puerto Rico due to the high winds, heavy rainfall, storm surge, wave action, and landslides. It was estimated that over 300,000 homes had been destroyed and many more damaged across the island. The hurricane completely destroyed the island's power grid, leaving all 3.4 million residents without electricity. Communication networks were crippled across the island. 95% of cell networks were down, with 48 of the island's 78 counties' networks rendered completely inoperable. 85% of the above-ground phone and internet cables were knocked out. The NEXRAD Doppler weather radar of Puerto Rico was also destroyed, where it measured winds of about 145 miles per hour before communications broke. The lasting effects were arguably just as bad, as food and fresh water was hard to come by, and power outages were routine in the months that followed. Maria would leave Puerto Rico and take a similar track as Jose from there, staying out to sea until it dissipated. Maria accounted for $91.6 billion of damage, making it the fourth costliest hurricane on record, and caused 3,059 deaths, making it the deadliest hurricane, each in Puerto Rico, Dominica, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Less than a week after Maria dissipated, another storm was forming in the South Caribbean Sea, and on October 5th, Tropical Storm Nate had formed. 6 hours after that, it crossed over Nicaragua and then back into the Western Caribbean. Nate brought days of torrential rain to the already saturated soils of Central America. Floods and mudslides were widespread, with Costa Rica and Nicaragua enduring the worst of the deadliest impacts. The storm cut off drinking water to nearly 500,000 people and left 18,500 without power. In Costa Rica, Nate caused over $500 million in damage, making it the costliest natural disaster in Costa Rican history. Nate then continued north into the Gulf, where it strengthened into a 90-mile-per-hour hurricane and raced towards the U.S. coast. Moving at a speed of 29 miles per hour, it was actually the fastest-moving recorded hurricane in the Gulf. Nate then made landfall in Louisiana as a low-end hurricane. Impacts in the United States were fairly minimal, with some storm surge damage along the coast. The day after Nate dissipated, one of the most interesting storms was developing. Out in the middle of the Atlantic, Tropical Storm Ophelia formed over abnormally warm water in this area of the ocean. Ophelia then tracked northeast and strengthened into an impressive Category 3 hurricane, becoming the easternmost major hurricane in the Atlantic Ocean. As it moved closer to Europe and over colder water, Ophelia lost its tropical characteristics and merged with a cold front, which allowed it to maintain strong winds, similar to what happened with Hurricane Sandy. The extratropical storm made landfall on Ireland with Category 1 equivalent winds, then hit Scotland and even made it all the way to Norway before finally dissipating. A 119-mile-per-hour wind gust was recorded in Ireland, the strongest ever recorded there. More than 360,000 customers in Ireland lost power. Ophelia would cause $87 million of damage across Europe. Finally, at this point, the season was on its last legs. In late October, Tropical Storm Felipe moved across the Caribbean, bringing more heavy rain to Central America, Cuba, and South Florida. The final storm of the season would be Tropical Storm Rina, which formed out in the Atlantic and dissipated without impacting land. Finally, at this point, the historic 2017 hurricane season was over. The World Meteorological Organization would go on to retire the names Harvey, Irma, Maria, and Nate, based on the destruction those storms caused throughout Texas, Central America, the Caribbean, and Florida. The 2017 hurricane season impacted so many people over the course of just 2.5 months. Let me know in the comments below how you were affected and what you remember of that fateful season. Thanks so much for watching, and as the 2025 season gears up as the making of this video, please stay safe out there.